So I don't know if you're noticing the structure of the day, but it is, we've structured it to sort of, to begin the day with sort of self-identification, try and confirm what ALD Connect is and aspires to be, what ALD Connect has done, and then we're continuing to talk about what each of the work groups within ALD Connect are doing. So we have the kind of the core administrative work group you saw from Alex Sherman talking and Justin D'Agostino talking about data collection and data structure. You saw from Troy in the group from the work group 3, the therapy, the candidate therapeutics data, a lot of in the industry advisory council. I think there's a lot of reason for optimism and excitement here in the ALD AMN world right now. We've got a lot of great momentum. And then here we have really the core of what we all think makes ALD Connect really special, and that's the engagement with, on several fronts, in particular engagement with the patient and advocate community. And this is basically the lifeblood, we think, of what ALD Connect aspires to do. And we're giving it quite a bit of time and energy here before we transition to the brainstorming session. So let me pass the mic to Jen Farmer. We will come back to the awards, I think, at the very end before we close for the day, okay? So we'll come to those. Jen Farmer, we're really excited to have as part of our group and our board. She's from the Friedreich's Ataxia Research Association. We, I think, met Jen through some of the rare disease networks. I think you and Florian had a chance to network. And what Jen and her group have done with Friedreich's Ataxia, similarly rare disease affecting children, is very inspiring to us, and I think we think a great role model for the sorts of things we want to do. And so let me pass the mic to Jen, tell her story.
Thank you. And it's great to be here again. I very much enjoyed being at the ALD Connect meeting last year and getting to know a lot of you and work with you over the past year. So I'm just going to hit a few highlights of what FARA does for those who don't know anything about the organization and what our main programs are. But I also thought I'd share some lessons learned and things that, if you had to do it over again, what would you do differently? Let's see. There we go. So certainly the stakeholder piece, I think, is very similar. And I'll talk a little bit about that. And then, again, the specific programs and initiatives and where we've decided to focus our efforts. And I think that's an important thing because you can't do everything. And so you have to decide what you can do and do well. And try and stay focused on it. And staying focused isn't easy because there are lots of things pulling you in lots of different directions, and all of those things have merit. But staying focused, I think, is part of the success. So FARA was founded in 1998, and with the real focus of being a research advocacy organization. At the time, in this particular disease, there wasn't any advocacy group or research alliance solely focused on Friedreich's ataxia. And so the founders were both parents and individuals affected by the disease, as well as 3 scientific founders. So it really was a collaboration between the scientific community and the patient community from the very beginning, and setting the vision and the mission for the organization. And that's true today. And our strategy over time hasn't changed a whole lot. So we knew we had to grow the scientific field because at that time there weren't many people working on FA, including basic scientists, clinicians, and there were absolutely 0 pharmaceutical companies involved. We also knew that for treatments, we couldn't put all our eggs in one basket. We had to approach this disease with diversity. And then public-private partnership we knew was essential. We didn't know then what that would look like, or how to make that work, but we knew that had to be part of the recipe, as well as advocacy. And the real guiding principle of the organization, and I think a part of our engagement, is just based on this collaboration and partnership, and continuing to foster an environment, whether that environment's virtual or physical, given the particular thing we're working on, continuing to foster an environment of collaboration. And so in this case, our stakeholders are all the same. You've got your patient community, the medical research community, industry, and your government partners. And I really like to think that FARA is doing our work when we take all these stakeholders and bring them all together so that they're all overlapping here in the middle, because that's when we make the most progress. So I don't forget to tell you some of the ways we work on engagement. Some of them are really tactical. Collecting blood samples. So sometimes, we can't collect the samples fast enough in the clinics. FARA can organize in a given location where we know we've got a key contingency of patients, a blood drive to get samples to company X because they need 50 samples to test a series of drug candidates in. And we've done this time and time again, just trying to find some of the logistical ways to help advance the research just a little bit faster. The other thing that we've done more recently related to patient engagement, and it's really taking a lot of traction, and I think it's been a work in progress. We're still working on it, but we started an ambassador program. And this is where individuals and families affected by Friedreich's ataxia kind of self-identify as wanting to be an ambassador. And we're providing training to them on a regular basis so that they understand what's going on in the research community. They also understand what some of the constraints are that our partners have. So pharmaceutical companies, academic researchers, understanding the drug development process, understanding the role of the regulatory agency, so that then this group of individuals can go out into the community, whether it's going to an academic lab, whether it's going to a pharmaceutical company, or talking to FDA on our behalf, and being able to share their stories, but then also participate in the drug development process. This has been incredibly successful. But it is a lot of work, and it requires, a group of people who are really dedicated to being engaged on a continuous basis. And I'm happy to talk more about that later. This is the other way that we kind of organize what we do. So this is this particular image is one that I think a lot of rare disease groups are using now, and it's based on work from the Clinical Trials Transformation and a Transformation Initiative. And that whole document by CTTI gives you a big laundry list of things you can do as an advocacy group, as an academic researcher, as an industry partner. And in each of these chevrons, there's a list of things that you can do depending on who you are. The challenge becomes picking amongst those things what it is you're going to do. But this is kind of the list of things that FARA has decided that we can really focus on. And this is really ambitious, but remember, we've been doing this now for almost 20 years. So we weren't doing all of these things when we first started. When we first started, we were really here at just funding basic science and getting it all going. We didn't start a patient registry until 2006. We didn't start our clinical trial network until 2004. So some of these things have staged over time. But I think this helps you, if you go through this process, thinking about, well, all right, where are we making our contribution, and how does it facilitate this drug development process? And where are our partners doing similar things so that we're not duplicating efforts? I just wanted to focus for 1 minute on our clinical research network, because I think that's very similar to what ALD Connect has done and has brought forward. So we started this in 2004. It's 8 sites in the US, 1 in Canada, 1 in Australia. And it was really, the purpose was to collect natural history data. And facilitate a biorepository, to work on biomarkers, and to provide support to the community in implementing and executing clinical trials. And ultimately, the goal would be improve patient care at those sites as well. The one piece we didn't think about early on, but we're engaged with now, but I wish we'd thought about it earlier in the process, was the regulatory piece. Doing all of this is really good, but if you don't do it with understanding what the regulatory guidelines are or what the regulators are going to want to see at the end of the day, you could be collecting a lot of really interesting, good data that you all really like, but if the regulatory agency doesn't find it useful or it's not going to get you to qualification of an endpoint or a biomarker, you're still missing a critical piece. This is just a case example of kind of how we put some of this together and how it's worked for us. So a company had come to us a few years ago. They were brand new to the Friedrich space, but they had a drug that they'd been developing for other diseases that they thought would be helpful in FA. And so the first thing that we were able to do was to assemble the key opinion leaders, both scientific and medical, to provide them with the knowledge that they needed to really think about how they were going to develop this drug for Friedrich's. And those folks and the data from our natural history study provided input for phase 2 trial design. We were also able to help train the contract research organization, the folks that they were using to implement the trial and monitor for the trial, because the folks monitoring didn't know anything about Friedreich's ataxia rating scales or the biomarkers that we were using or side effects, medications that are common in FA. And so there was a lot of training that we were able to provide that I think really helped get this trial up and going smoothly. We were also able to identify a patient representative who serves on the Data Safety Monitoring Board. And that's what I was talking about with that ambassador program, and having patients who are engaged, who are trained, who are ready to serve in these kinds of roles. That can be a very intimidating ask, somebody serving on a Data Safety Monitoring Board when they're not a statistician or they're not a scientist. But helping that person understand what their role is on that board and where their input's most needed really facilitated that process. And then we helped with recruitment for the trial through our patient registry and through social media. This has been a really tricky trial. It's enrolled in cohorts of 8 over the last 18 months. So you'd get 8 people in, you'd have to wait a month till the safety was assessed, then they say, okay, yep, it's safe, we're gonna open up another cohort of 8, and the same thing over and over again. And so managing recruitment and keeping excitement sustained has been a real challenge, because people get excited all at once, but you can't enroll everybody at once. And I think that, and the company hasn't had to do any of that. We've managed all of that for them, and along with our clinical research network sites. So real quickly, so this clinical trial network, so our natural history study and our clinical trial network has definitely been a difference maker in terms of attracting industry. Pretty much anybody working in the Friedreich's ataxia space right now will tell you that this is one of the reasons why they're willing to work in this space and develop drugs, is because they know that this infrastructure exists. This has been a long-term project. We started this in 2004, and it's still ongoing. And I think this is an important thing to remember. This is not, these kinds of investments are really not short-term. And they are long-term. You have to make the investment. It does evolve over time, though. It's not static in terms of the scope of work and things that you're doing. I think one of the things that you have that's incredibly important, that we've also been fortunate to have, but where I see other groups fall down, is that dedication from the physicians and the researchers and the coordinators. If you don't have that, it won't work. And investing in people and supporting those people, I can't tell you how important it is, especially once you get to clinical trials. Having the same coordinators involved is incredibly important. When patients go to these sites and they see the same coordinator each time they go, it builds trust, it builds confidence. And that's something that we've learned has been an important thing to invest in and make sure that we can retain people who are really dedicated to this disease. You all have to work together, I think, to be spokespersons, but I think this group already understands that. One thing we didn't do, and we're still challenged with, is trying to figure out how to include pre-symptomatic individuals in our natural history study. But it's very clear, based on the drug development and the needs of drug development, that that's a target group that we have to figure out how to reach. I think the work that you've done with newborn screening puts you way ahead of us in that regard. But that's, thinking about with the newborn screening, what tools are you going to use to evaluate natural history in those patients is incredibly important. And investing in developing those tools and validating those tools. Patient support. So in our natural history study, people come once a year. It's now in its 12th, 13th year. We have about 60% retention in that natural history study. We'd have better retention if we could provide more support for patient travel, because we only have 8 sites in the US. And so at 2 of our sites, people are traveling on average over 500 miles to get to one of these sites. And it's always a patient and a caregiver, and it's always an overnight stay. And so it's easily costing, $1,000 to $2,000 to come for one of these visits. And so we've put forth some recent efforts to be able to provide more support to our sites so that they can reimburse patients for their travel expenses. I think you've also done a better job than we have in terms of thinking about how to share data and resources. We didn't do so well with that at the beginning, and now we're having to go back and redo that, and that's a time-consuming process. Natural history is never complete, and no matter how much you have, it never seems like it's good enough, and you just have to live with that and have to know that that's the way it is. At the same, you've got more than everybody else, but it just doesn't ever seem like it's everything you're going to need. And I think part of that is because we're going to be successful with treatments, and the natural history is going to change, and you're going to need to continue to build on that. But I think it's important not to get caught up with perfection. A lot of groups get stuck; they don't start because they're afraid that they can't do everything. So even if you can only do a few things, do those few things and do them well, and add on later as you can. And again, think regulatory. Talk to the FDA. Schedule meetings with them. You can. We just contacted the CBER division of FDA because for the first time we're going to have gene therapy trials in FA. And so we wrote to Wilson Bryan and said, we know you're going to start seeing pre-IND packages coming in. Can we facilitate a meeting with you and your staff to just tell you about Friedreich's ataxia, our outcome measures, our natural history, our biomarker studies, and just tell you what's going on in the field and what we know and what data is available? And the answer was yes. And we actually got the meeting scheduled within 3 months. So these are also things that you can do, but then you'll get feedback from the FDA. You'll know at the end of that meeting which of those endpoints and outcome measures they're thinking look good, or areas where they think, boy, we don't have answers to these kinds of questions, and I think we're going to need those. Also, starting to, as you have biomarkers, socialize them through the critical path group. Even if you're not going to get the biomarker fully qualified, there are all different kinds of things that you can do to get your biomarkers and your endpoints socialized within FDA so that they are comfortable, familiar with those biomarkers, and they understand the work that went into validating them. One of the key things that I think industry is looking for from you is to understand what the development path looks like. What is that approvable phase 3 endpoint? And you can do that without having conducted a trial if you engage with the regulatory agency and get their feedback. So just to conclude quickly, you know, I don't think that in the business of natural history studies, biomarkers, and the work that they're doing, we're all doing, you know, unfortunately, I haven't found any short-term solutions. We haven't been successful, you know, with the Hail Mary passes. You really have to be willing to just, you know, stick with your game plan and just keep driving the ball, even if it means you got to keep driving it up the middle. But stick to it. It will pay off, and later you'll be able to leverage and borrow from what you've learned. The partnerships and the engagement of those partnerships is absolutely critical. Investing in the people, again, I can't say enough. The fact that we haven't had turnover at any of those clinical research network sites, the same group of physicians are engaged. They're the ones who are executing the clinical trials, the coordinators, has just been critical. And the other two I think we covered. But, you know, the financial requirement is also tricky, and maybe I'll speak to that. So we haven't been very successful with getting funding like from NIH or any government funding agencies. So a lot of the resources that have been put forward for our patient registry and natural history study have all come from fundraising through the organization. And I'm happy to talk about what that looks like, but you know, we had to start small when we had smaller amount of resources and then grow that over time. But, you know, the financial requirement also, I think you need to think long-term. Because if you bring in additional resources to cover some of the basic infrastructure over the next, you know, let's say 5 years from now, you've got enough resources to cover basic infrastructure. Well, then those other resources, you're going to be able to apply to other research projects or more funding for patient travel, or, you know, whatever the other gaps are that you knew if you could fill, you'd be more efficient.
Great.
So questions? Yep.
I'm just interested in what role that patient played on the DSMB.
So what role did the patient play on the DSMB? That's a great question. So specifically, when you do see safety signals, let's say abnormal blood levels or side effects showing up, how significant are these to the patient in the context of living with the disease? So do you care if the ALT has gone up? You know, is that a risk somebody's willing to take given the context of the disease? Another example of where that has paid off is all of a sudden, because they're thinking about, you know, some safety signal they're seeing in the data, they decide, oh, we're going to add one more test to the visit. And the person on the DSMB, who was the patient, was able to say, wait a minute, like this isn't as simple a test as you think it is. It was a urine collection. And that patient was able to say, do you understand how difficult it is to collect a urine sample from a patient who's wheelchair bound? And is there any other way that we can get this information other than a urine test? Because this is not as simple as you think it is. And by the way, you'll never get a clean catch. And so, you know, really functional kinds of things, but things that are going to directly impact the patient's role in the study. Florian?
That was great, Jen. I guess some practical questions, because we love the fact that, you know, we have you here in this history, this 20-year history, and clearly things are different now. I think, you know, we had a critical path innovation meeting very early on, actually right at the time we were forming ALD Connect and had regulatory input. but there's some challenges that are probably similar, and one is how did you decide on number of sites and geographical coverage? And do you feel like, having 8 sites in the U.S., I'm just curious, how many patients are you recruiting and following, and how does that compare to the overall population of Friedreich's ataxia? And did you go through any, evolution in how you thought about that, and how satisfied are you now?
Those are all great questions. So we estimate that there are about 4,000 people in the U.S. with FA, maybe 5,000, somewhere in there. We have just over 800 individuals enrolled in the natural history study in the U.S. So maybe we have about 25%, maybe a little less. The sites really came about based on the physicians, the clinicians interested in the disease and willing to make the contribution to do this, because when we started, we didn't have a lot of resources. We needed to leverage institutional resources, clinical visits, and over time, as resources have become more available and we've been able to think about how to expand, we've tried to look at those geographic, like we have absolutely no site, we have one site west of Iowa, and that's at UCLA. So we've tried to find a site in the Pacific Northwest. We have tried to find a site in Texas. We've tried to find a site in Colorado. But it's really difficult if you don't have that clinician researcher who is engaged and wants to do it. And so it's not even a matter of money. It's a matter of people. So.
Did that change over time, or was it clear?
These 8 have, we've expanded 2 sites in the last 12 years. That's it. We found 2 people who wanted to become engaged and get involved. So it wasn't that from the very beginning. And we would gladly continue to expand today if we had the people who were interested and wanted to do it. Because it is a huge travel burden for those patients. So the patients going to the LA site, because it's the only West Coast site, they have 200 of the 800 patients are at that LA site, and the average travel distance is over about 900 kilometers. So many of those traveling much greater distances than that, but the average for those 200 patients is 900 kilometers. It's a huge commitment. So we would love to have more sites.
So did you invest in more sites and sites failed, or all the sites that exist now have always existed and there have never been more or less?
We invested in two new ones,
Okay.
based on interest and at those sites.
Okay.
So.
Great. There was a question.
Hi, I'm Irene Hanega from the Netherlands. I had a question about your drive-by for fast blood sampling. How did you get approval for? Did you general approval by the IRB, or how did you do that?
So several of our sites put together an IRB approval to specifically collect blood samples and skin samples for fibroblast lines. And we just keep renewing that every year. And we include in there that we're going to go out and do these mobile blood drives. And so, any time of the year, if somebody contacts us and says, hey, we need blood samples, all we have to do is add that company to the IRB and put the material transfer agreement in place, and we're ready to go.
Great.
So, yeah.
We should probably move on to the next one. Maybe we'll save this for the end, Jen. We'll come back to this, but maybe the question about how to engage patients and advocates and keep them engaged is something we'll try and talk about in the brainstorming session, but would be really interested in your input on that. That's critical. So, before we go on to the newborn screening, was there, Kathleen, was there something announcement you wanted to make? Okay. Okay.
I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention, there's a new book that was just released called Smiles and Duct Tape by Jessie Torrey. It is a first-hand account of an ALD mom written about her son's experience with his transplant. And I pre-ordered it when I saw on Facebook that an ALD mom had written a book. And I have to tell you, unsolicited, this is a fabulous read. And for anyone in industry who's looking for kind of a first-hand patient account of what it feels like to go from day, minus 20 through, they go through 1,000 and beyond, I just really recommend it. It's available at deedspublishing.com. I don't think it's on Amazon yet. It's new release. Anyway, I just wanted to support a fellow ALD mom, and it's really a fantastic read. So Smiles and Duct Tape by Jessie Torrey, Torrey. So that's my shameless plug for mom I know on Facebook who wrote a great book.